I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, because there've been a number of small discussions as it relates to reinsurance, and so Mr. Beaman, maybe I'll just direct this at you. Just a question about the costs/benefits of reinsurance, and maybe you could give some thoughts on that, because there seems to be some questions.
Sure. With regard to reinsurance is definitely a huge part of the tool, and Ms. Pataki, I very much appreciated you bringing it up. It's a big part of the potential overall funding and sort of the top end of the potential funding. Once you cut through the layers of assessments and bonding and, of course, all the cash on hand, what you're left with is that reinsurance over the top. To the extent that the reinsurance hasn't been penetrated, that's true, but that goes to the worries with the possible maximum loss and having to manage up to a storm that we haven't seen yet, frankly. And so the concern would be if you didn't have a substantial layer of reinsurance over the top of TWIA and you got that storm that we've talked about several times in this conversation, the one that wiggles and hits square on Galveston instead of obliquely on Galveston, or some other really large number storm that we haven't seen. One thing we have learned, and this, I think this is really important for all of us, both in terms of TWIA in the financial management and catastrophe management, is that we are continually surprised by the uniqueness of storms here. That every time we have a storm, it seems like what we have is one the likes of which we have never seen before, and so that's it's a bigger question than the TWIA question. This issue of of what we're facing, but the direct response to your question is that thick layer. We think my coalition thinks that thick layer of reinsurance is necessary. Because we're managing to a risk and not necessarily to a historical experience. That being said, to the extent that the statute says that we can only reinsure over the top of the exhaustion of everything else, we would look to going back to a time, and this was previous law for much of the existence of TWIA, allowed the board to decide where to place reinsurance in any space, and they could buy a small tranche of reinsurance, for instance, to protect the assets, to protect the CRTF. We think that would actually be a good idea to let the board, with the approval of the TDI, give them some freedom to be able to protect TWIA assets. So that's certainly a topic that we think would be worthy of discussion.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Watson, you're recognized.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. I remember I feel like I remember when we allowed reinsurance for those kinds of things.
Yes, sir.
But what I don't remember is what the decision-making process was that got us away from that. That instinctively makes sense to me. So there must have been some argument for why we got away from that.
I can't describe the process because it certainly wasn't my thought process, but I can describe the time.
Well,
and the time was
what the argument was for it.
It was a concern that we were spending. It was a basic concern that we were spending too much money on reinsurance.
But that's how you insure your assets.
I would agree. I disagreed. Okay. I disagreed with the logic.
I think the argument, Senator Watson, after Hurricane Ike depleted the CRTF, and that was paid for by assessments with premium tax credits. And TWIA bought no reinsurance immediately after Ike. There were arguments made from the coastal delegation that we don't need to spend that money on reinsurance so we can rebuild the CRTF. And then in 2015, as we revisited that funding formula, there was a need to really have money, a large sum of money for the big storm. We can pay for the small storms. And buying reinsurance at the higher level is just like when you buy a deductible on your home. If you want to have a lower deductible to let the insurance company pay, you pay more. If you want to increase your deductible, they're going to reduce your premium. Reinsurance operates the same way. Mm-hmm. When you buy at lower attachment levels, you're going to pay a lot more for it. And so the idea and the argument was, let's build the CRTF, put in these layers of bonds and these layers of assessments, and then buy reinsurance at this higher level, and we won't have to use as much money to buy more reinsurance to pay claims. Hurricanes hit very seldom, but when they hit, they're huge. And the 1 in 100 is just an estimate of, okay, that's a Category 2 size storm, and it's going to cause $4 billion in losses is the estimate. A Category 3 or 4 storm, in these studies you've referred to, PML, I've seen numbers as high as $12 billion. Now, we don't have any way to pay for that right now, so we pray that that does not happen. But that's the arguments and the thinking of the more we build this CRTF, that pushes assessments back. Policyholders in your district, Representative Paddock, when there's no assessments, then they're not impacted as much as the CRTF bills. And then when we have more reinsurance, if it's over that 1 in 100, then we can pay for that. And the people that live on the coast get their claims paid and they don't have to wait. That's the thinking and that's the arguments, and that's why it basically worked in Harvey. Whether it will work in a bigger storm or not, I don't know. We have had Category 5s hit Texas. Gilbert hit Texas. It went in over the King Ranch. Didn't have many homes there. We had a lot of cattle, but that was a Category 5 hurricane, one of the largest ever. If that had turned up to Corpus or Galveston, there's where you're going to have a big number.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Members, any other questions for the panel? All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.